what's poolish? Well, basically it's a pre-fermentation, and basically that means flour, water, and a very, very small amount of yeast. And the unusual thing about poolish is that it's equal amounts of water to flour. So if we've got a kilo of flour, we'd add a litre of water, and around about 2 grams of yeast, depending on the fermentation time. Here's one that I made earlier, which is a poolish that's been fermenting for 16 hours now, at around about 22 degrees C. And as you can see, got a nice bubbly texture going on in there. It's very aerated. It smells really malty, sweet, hoppy, a little bit like a modern lager almost. You can see there's lots of air bubbles trapped in it, and it's very, very stringy. Okay, this technique was introduced by the Polish actually, this pre-ferment, which migrated over to Austria and then found its way into a lot of French baking, and we're going to make some French baguettes today from a poolish. So that's been fermenting for 16 hours. What we're going to do is have a look at how we make a poolish, and it's so easy. Got some tepid water around about 14 degrees. There's some yeast in there already. What I'm going to do is we'll just disperse the yeast into the water first, and this is all by hand. Try and keep just one hand working all the time. Then add the flour, which is a French T65 flour. So we've got French milled wheat going into this, and I always think it's quite important for baguettes to have French wheat. It's well, it's part and parcel of the origins of baking, and it's indigenous to the areas and regions. That's why it's really important. You can see that as we're mixing that now, it's just coming together, and it's a really nice creamy colour, which is what you'd expect from T65 flour, because it is slightly creamier than T55. They are just basically grades of French flour. I mean, literally, that is it. You don't need to mix it too long. It's not about mixing, because while it's bulk fermenting, so what I mean by that is, while it's having its rest time for around about 16 hours, the gluten in the wheat is maturing. So because we're giving it time, it's almost like it's being mixed as well, because the gluten's maturing. So what we can do is just clean the edges off with a plastic scraper, and essentially that's your poolish. I mean, that's literally taken a couple of minutes to make, and what it gives you at the end of the fermentation is so much flavour in the final product, and it also helps with the moulding. It sort of relaxes the dough, because the gluten's been matured. It helps relax the dough, so when we're moulding the baguettes out nice and long, to around about 55 centimetres, we're putting a lot of pressure on that dough, so it just needs to have the right equilibrium of tenacity, but also the extensibility. So it's really important to get that right balance, and pre-ferments, whether they're poolish or levains, or pate fermenté, they're all really important to this. On sourdoughs, we've got a pre-made sourdough here, so that means we've started a culture of wild yeast, sort of generating this. This is a putty-like substance at the moment, which is a little bit inactive because we've had it in the chiller for around about a week, so it needs a refreshment. So we need to add some more flour into it and some more water. That means we're going to feed it. So that's what it looks like at the moment, very putty-like, and not a lot of structure to it. It smells very, very acidic, good flavour. But when we start to refresh it and want to give it a little bit more activity in terms of gas production, this is what it looks like once we've mixed some flour and water back into it. So this is actually just being mixed now. So you can see it's adding a little bit more extensibility to it and a little bit more light, but we've lost all the fermentation because we're diluting it in effect by adding fresh flour to it. So once that's mixed like that, try and hold the sourdough around about 28 to 30 degrees, and this is what we've done here. And you can see from the sourdough that's fermented for around about 16 hours now. It smells really complex, very winey almost, and it's got a lot of aeration in it. It's actually very soft, which is what you'd expect from this type of sourdough. Okay, so that's exactly what we want that sort of stringiness to it. What we do then is that we don't bake with this at all as 100% dough. We're going to add this to a final dough around about 10%, because we don't want the baguettes tasted too sour and acidic. It's just to help with the complex flavour. So what we're going to do is going to add around about 10 to 15% of this to flour weight. So for every kilo of flour, we're going to add, if we're adding 10%, 100 grams of sourdough. With the baguette dough, what we're going to do is add more wheat flour. We're going to add salt, we're going to add baker's yeast and water. Okay, so it's as simple as that. Okay, what we're going to make now is levain baguettes or sourdough baguettes. So we're going to use a method called autolyse again, as we've done with Polish as well. So basically what I've got here is all of the water with the fermented levain. I'm going to tip that in into the spiral mixer. And then I've got the T65 flour pre-weighed out. I'm going to tip that into the mixer. Get mixed for a short space of time, around about 2 to 3 minutes again on slow speed, until it all comes together, and then leave it stand for 30 minutes at least, so that the starch starts to soak up the moisture and hydrate and become more relaxed. Okay, now we're mixing sourdough or levain baguettes. It's had its autolyse resting period of 30 minutes, so we're going to add the additional salt in there, and we're going to put the yeast in there as well. So that is everything in the final recipe. So we've got the levain in there, we've got the flour, we've got the salt, yeast and water. Okay, so very, very basic ingredients for baguettes. All we're going to do, set this mixing for 10 minutes, and then we'll go on to bulk fermenting that for around about 1 or 2 hours. Okay, so we've mixed the levain baguette, and as I said, we're looking for a dough temperature of 24. Really important bit of kit, and especially coming useful for the World Cup team baking. Dough temperature recording, record the environment, record the flour temperature, water temperature, so you can come up to get bang on 24 degrees, because this temperature is key in fermentation, as you're all aware. Okay, so what I'm going to do, just wet the hands a little bit, because it is quite a wet dough and it stops it sticking to my hand basically. Okay, there you go. A baguette dough made with levain. We're going to bulk ferment that now for at least an hour, and we're going to give it a series of folds also. Levain baguette, it's had 45 minutes bulk fermentation now. As you can see from the look and feel of the dough, it's quite a wet dough, it's got a nice shine to it. What we're going to do is fold it. So I'm going to show you the technique for folding it. Basically, touch of flour on the top. I'm going to flour the work surface just enough. What we're going to do using this metal Scotch scraper, so tease it out, contain it. rid of any excess flour. Start folding it over. Again, this feels quite a loose dough at the moment. It doesn't feel like it's got a lot of strength to it. It's quite extensible. So this is why we're putting the folds in. Okay, and as you can see now, that's tightened up already from where we were on the really loose dough, and it's put strength back into it. It's degassed it all. We're subdividing all the cell structure as well in the dough, so we're going to get a good crumb structure out of the final baked product. So once we've done that, we'll put a little bit of flour there. We'll recover it up. Have a look at that one again in another 45 minutes and assess if we need to put another fold in, or we can take it straight for dividing. So you can see what I'm doing here. It's getting nice and even on the table to start getting ready to start dividing. You can see I can move it around freely. It's important that you get just the right amount of flour on the work surface. Got too much, it stops moulding and we get faults in the dough, it stops it sealing together. But we just need enough to keep it going. So what I'm going to do is start scaling this now, ready for shaping. You can see, it's a nice regular shape, dividing this in 3 parts. Okay, I'm just going to grab a scale. Now, baguettes, traditional baguettes, use a scale around about 330 to 350 grams. We're looking for a baked weight of 250 grams. So we lose quite a lot of moisture out of baguettes when we bake them because there's a lot of crust to crumb. Okay, so what we're looking for is that sort of shape on the dividing, because what we're trying to do is get a natural progression of making the baguette longer without putting too much force into it. What's also important is that when we're doing this, that we keep the dough pieces in order. So I know that's the first one that I've scaled, because the dough's relaxing all the time, so I want to work with relaxed doughs all the time. So when we're working with it, we're making the dough longer by moulding it long. So we need to make sure that the gluten's nice and relaxed in the dough, so it's very extensible. It's always important to know which ones you've done first. Okay, so overnight chilled baguette. So once we've let them rest for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, next stage is just to get them into more of a cylindrical shape. So it's quite easy really. Just a little bit of gentle folding. You can see we're just starting to get the shape of the baguette. What we're going to do, get a little bit of flour and rest them again. Okay, so it's quite a simple technique. Don't need a lot of flour around it. Not a lot of pressure either. Not putting too much work into it. It just works into itself quite nicely actually. So what we're looking for is to get the rounded edges happening already on the dough piece, so we're not getting any, when we make the final baguette, that it looks smooth towards the edge, and that's quite a key stage of making the baguettes as well. So what we're going to do to mould the baguette is tamp it out a little bit, fold it over halfway, spin it round that way, and then fold it over halfway again. Then what we're going to do is just lift it up, stretch it out a little bit more, and then mould it down the seam. Then we're going to pick it up again, and finally mould it out, and give it a little wiggle at the end to nip the ends off, so we're getting a nice symmetrical baguette. We'll put it on the couche, which is the cloth, seam up, and then we just put a little buffer in there to stop the baguettes joining up on the tray. I've lightly floured the couche, so because it is a higher water content baguette, it could stick if we didn't do that. So all we're going to do is just sort of basically repeat that process, and this is all about sort of practice and getting the right amount of pressure onto the dough. Press it too hard, it could stick to the table. Don't press it hard enough, we're not going to give the structure to the dough and the final strength. So it's just about getting the feel of the baguette. Right. These are roughly about 50 to 53 centimetres long. So stretching out all the time, making it longer and longer. See there, we've got a central seam running down. It's nice and even. Cloth, and the next stage we'd do is stick them in an ambient sort of proving chamber. Not a lot of humidity. Ambient conditions are the best for these baguettes because they've got such a high water content. But we don't need any extra humidity, they'll prove quite happily as long as they're in a covered environment free from drafts. Typically, depending on the type of dough temperature, you've got about 24 degrees, and the amount of yeast you've got in these baguettes, you're looking around about a 45-minute proof time upwards. Okay, now we've got baguettes proved, good consistency. We're going to take them off the cloth using a typical technique. Slide them onto the peel. Also making sure is that we're getting them nice and straight using the outside of the board, keeping the seam down. So keeping the seam, we've moulded it on the baguette to the bottom of the peel. Okay, so cutting baguettes, what we're looking for is holding the knife around about 35 degrees when we're cutting on top. So if you can see that, we're going to put 5 diagonal cuts down the length of the baguette. We're going to make sure they start from the tip in the centre and finish the tip at the end, and that they're all the same length, and that the last cut precedes a third back of the first cut. So here we go. Okay, so it's all about the length of the cut being the same all the way down, and starting a third back from the last cut, and make sure you start at the tip, finish at the tip in the centre. And it's really important we do this because the cuts allow the dough to expand and evenly expand, otherwise what we'll see is rupturing on the sides of the baguette and uneven bursting, and it looks very unpleasant really. So pop them into those. Okay, so we've baked the baguettes now. They've been in a deck oven, stone bed deck oven. Start off at 250 degrees C with an injection of steam. The oven then drops down to about 225 naturally because of the cooler products that are going inside there. The oven then tips up to around about 230. We release the steam 2/3 of the way through, start drying the crust out, and in total they've had around 22 to 23 minutes. Okay, great, so there we go, decent baguettes. It's a very hard product to get right in terms of flavour, in terms of the way it looks. This is what we're looking for, evenness in the cuts. So this part here isn't bursting, we're keeping that very even and consistent. We're looking for a nice pronounced burst with a creamy colour, and then a sort of deeper reddy sort of brown colour towards the edges, and I think you can probably just hear them, if you can, crackling a little bit. It's what we call singing. So this is baguette made with a levain sourdough at 10%.